Hi, and welcome to Theme Park Academy, brought to you in partnership with blooloop. Dive into the world of themed attractions with us as we bring you the inside scoop directly from the voices of the industry themselves. Now, today we've got a really special show. We have Jeremy Grunert from FrankNDesign, and he's going to be telling us all about the design process that goes into creating some of the best themed attractions in the world.
Well, hey, Jeremy, thank you for joining us today. And we're really excited to have you. And thought we could just start out a bit with where you work, what you do, and then maybe talk about how you got into the industry.
Yeah, super cool. Thanks for having me on the show with you guys. I appreciate it. Been a fan for a while. I currently work with FrankNDesign, which is a company that kind of focuses on the design development of theme parks. But my career largely started from the operations side. So really, I started as an operator at 15 from Tampa, Florida, originally. So Busch Gardens is my home park, and they wouldn't let me operate roller coasters at 15, but I could sweep the ground in front of it, and I was allowed to measure children to make sure they were tall enough. So I took that job very seriously. But so started as an operator, and then ultimately ended up as a creative along the way. And I've been at it for just shy of 20 years now, between the operations and the design side, probably about 10 years of each. And it's been quite a journey, honestly. So that's kind of it in a nutshell from a very high level. But I'm a fan turned designer, so it's always great to have a passion and be a fan, and then ultimately turn that into a career.
For sure, for sure. And like when we think about like your first job or first jobs kind of on the outside, what do you think that taught you that you actually have still carried over into what you do day to day now?
Wow, it's actually super relevant, and I encourage any opportunity I get to meet. I don't want to just say students, but anyone trying to get into the industry, whether it's mid career or younger. It's great to have a foundation in the parks. Whether I've met so many people in this industry that were performers, ride operators, retail, etc. I mean, there's just so many people you could list a slew of them. But the lessons you learn from what not to do or what was done and shouldn't be done again is always great. Uh, this is pretty relevant. But from the operations side, it's super impactful. Like when we're designing an attraction, so in my resume, I was a part of the team that brought Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure to life, and being able, obviously, there's operational consultants from the park side that come in and sit with the creative partners to understand the evacuation and how to operate it, and then also the storytelling that we're going to be asking the operators to bring to life because they are pseudo actors in the stories. But being able to understand the need for a lane to pull trash. So when you're designing a queue, you don't most designers don't think about how hard it is to grab a trash bag that has that special combination of turkey leg, popcorn, and beer. But of course that heavy duty bag's not going to last. And having to pull that out in a room full of people and then somehow inch your way, pardon me, excuse me, pardon me, to the door to get it outside, only for it to break on your foot or something. It's a horrible experience, and I guarantee you, anyone here who's ever operated a park has had this type of experience. But um, just something as silly as that, knowing that having a lane for an operator to walk by and building that into a design can make all the difference when it comes to just the designers who spend 4 or 5 years with an attraction if it's a really involved experience like you'd see kind of at like a Disney or Universal. But the operators spend 20 years with it, and they are there 10 to 12 hours a day operating it. So having again, that's just one example. But evacuation, having a good understanding of clear pathways, because a lot of times you're having to escort guests off, creating extra space for guests to stand, so they're not necessarily within a dangerous hardware situation. There's just so many little things that, having been in those environments, you can become so much more clever with the design, signage for guests as well. What guests actually pay attention to, a sign on a wall, no one's really going to care about it, but an interactive, fun video about how to load a roller coaster or something along those lines is going to grab their attention and help them focus, especially if there's a transferring moving belt situation. Some of these attractions, as we all know, are can be very complex to load onto depending on what they are. So having been in that environment for several years, and also understanding the mechanics of how guests behave, because it's sometimes guests leave their brains at the door, right? When they come in and they forget some basic things. You need to put the seatbelt on before you ride the ride. So being able to understand those dynamics and how to help the future operations teams is super, super beneficial.
Well, I'll go off on a tangent already then, 'cause I guess that's a great question. What actually do guests pay attention to? Because, I go to some parks and I see these signage, especially when it comes to rules that are gigantic. They're 6
Mhm.
feet tall. What have you found that actually engages guests in terms of safety or attention or even just general wayfinding?
Yeah, it's certainly not signs. But I say that in jest. But have you ever really stopped to read the 2 paragraphs of text at the beginning of any attraction? It quite literally can tell you that it's going to throw you off the edge of the earth, and you probably didn't stop to read it. Um, because that's not what they're compelled by, the very large marquee, or the whatever that big weenie type moment is that's drawing you in, or the massive roller coaster behind the thing. Obviously, it's what Top Thrill. They're not reading the signs; they're looking at the massive spike
Right,
and
right.
going, "I want to do that." So, typically it comes to, I mean, a lot of video media nowadays is how most people communicate these things, showing examples of how to load. I mean, you see it at all the major parks, and that's pretty effective when it comes to and separating that from the story, because a lot of what we'll get into that later, I'm sure, but a lot of the work that I do is more story based, so it's not really the raw steel in a park with a light theme. It's a heavily themed queue where you have to kind of break the immersion for a moment and remind people that if they need to buckle their seatbelt before they go on their adventure with insert fun IP. So I think a lot of it's video. It's really best when team members communicate it honestly, and you don't always have the labor. But when you can have I think like Tower of Terror does it really well. For instance,
Hmm.
they have one of their bellhops that actually gets to spend a little bit of time with you in between loading the experience, and they play a recording that I can guarantee you most people probably don't listen to. But when they make it a point to say, "Okay, look at me. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get on, grab that little yellow strap, give it a tug for me, and then we're going to go on our way, and nothing bad's going to happen." And everybody has this. It actually adds value to the moment because you've had a personal interaction with an operator who really seems to be enjoying their experience and helping bring you into it. I think that's worth its weight in gold. That's going to be a hit and miss depending on where you go and when you visit. Peak summer, when it's 95 degrees, it's hard to maintain that energy as an operator. I know
Sure.
it as a fact, but I think those moments where you can have a connection with an operator is really important because it adds so much value. But video media and examples are probably the most successful. But the walls of text exist largely for legal reasons,
Hmm.
and I would encourage everyone to read those. But I simply know that's not the case in a lot of instances. So being able to find compelling ways to attract their attention and not pull away from the story, but also ensure that those safety requirements are communicated. That's my approach to all of it.
Well, that makes sense. And I know that, like, talking about your jobs also, you kind of went from the ops side, and I think you worked at Thinkwell for a while. And can you kind of tell our listeners what companies like Thinkwell or other master planning or design companies do? Because a lot of them don't really have experience kind of with that part of our industry.
Sure. So as we kind of said, I started as an operator when I was quite young, and I'm going to do a quick advertisement for our friends at IAPA, actually. But I found a program called the IAPA Ambassador Internship, and I want to throw that out there because that is super important. And the applications as of today are open. So if you're a young in your career or kind of switching into the career, there's not really too many requirements. They will take somebody who's mid-career to some extent, but it's very open and they allow quite a few people to join. And it gives you unfettered access to the IAPA expos, whether it be Barcelona, Shanghai, or Orlando. So you actually get to be a part of it and help put it on. They obviously need quite a bit of staff, but the reason why that's important is that in return, they give you the opportunity to be exposed to the entire industry. You get that pass to walk the show floor, which at the time I had never had that opportunity to really. This was quite a while ago, I think 2005. So it was very hard to walk the show floor back then, unless you had a company sponsoring you. It was financially difficult to be a part of that. And anywho, I had a desire of kind of realizing, these things are great, and obviously I've always been obsessed with the theme parks, I've been running a ride at a theme park. Now I'd like to meet the people who actually make all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so during my time, because of that ambassador internship, or whatever means you can find to get yourself to an IAPA, because the exposure is phenomenal. It's where I met people like yourself, Adam, and other folks who were actively selling product, working with the vendors directly. But I also realized that I wasn't going to sell a roller coaster to someone. It wasn't my path. I really wanted to be the person that helped brought all the things together. I wanted to know the roller coaster people in order to bring them together with the scenics and the special effects and all the other elements to craft something that is a bit more than its some of its parts. And when I was there, I actually had the opportunity to meet the Thinkwell Group, as well as JRA, which is now part of RWS,
Mm-hmm.
BRC. There's so many of them, and they all have kind of specialized purposes within the industry, but they all kind of go after the same thing, which is storytelling, I guess, is the best way to put that. And I met Thinkwell, and what the work they were doing really resonated with me, and they're kind of they're quirky. They called everybody a Thinkwellian, was kind of like their thing, and back then that felt really cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
It still is really cool to me, but the opportunity was kind of put out there. And to be fair, and I actually love to share this with everybody, that didn't happen overnight. I met them, and then it took 3 years before that seed grew into an opportunity. They looked at me and they said, "Wow, you're 18. That's cool. You know nothing." And I largely agreed with them. And they said, "Why don't you have this great experience with the parks, and we actually really value that," which is one of the first things they said to me. And they said, "But are you going to specialize into something? Are you going to go to university? Are you going to focus on engineering something?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to do any of those things. I want to be the person that brings all of it together." And they said, "Well, get some experience and come back to us." And so I spent some time in education, and then I spent some time in actual like physical experience within the parks. At that point, I had transitioned to working with the Universal in an operator and entertainment management capacity, kind of being a part of some of their marquee, their big Halloween Horror Nights and some of those events, and becoming more well-rounded in the product of a theme park, where I ultimately was able to reconnect with Thinkwell. And kind of this is the importance, and I think you guys both know this, right? And anybody who's been around, especially when you're building relationships in this industry, you're planting seeds, and who knows how long. It could spring up in a minute, could spring up in 5 years, but that's why you don't chase business. It's why you don't chase people. You build meaningful relationships that lead to things in the future that you don't even know what that will do. It's a fruit bearing tree, so you want to grow that tree strong. So each year you have a full crop of whatever fruit. Insert random fruit there, but the opportunity popped up, and they actually, it's funny that this is happening today because this is an anniversary for me. April 1st, which was the cruelest joke that I think they ever played on me. They said, "You start April 1st." And I was, at the time, was in Florida. And back then you couldn't be remote doing theme parks. So they said, "You'll have to come to LA." And I said, just to be clear, can I start April 2nd? And they said, "April 1st, the project is when it starts. You need to be out here." And I just said, "But could we just please confirm that this isn't a cruel joke?" It's a long way. It's a 30-hour drive. Anyways, and they laughed. And anywho, but I packed up my car. This is the willingness to have to be. This is kind of my second point with this, is the willingness to chase after that dream. It's a big thing to write that check, but in order to cash it, you're going to have to do it. And luckily nowadays, everybody, the concept of being remote, perhaps one of the only positive things of COVID is that it really drove into the ability to do remote work is okay, and it can be very successful, and it can work. I would say that is a positive that we saw. But then it wasn't available. So I drove across the country and became a part of Thinkwell. And from there, really helped start to learn the process of design and being fully integrated in the design process of production, from the blue sky, the big ideas, which is really where, like a Thinkwell or similar would specialize, coming up with that. We want to have a park. We want to have a fun theme. We want to tell a story, and we want to get the greatest ROI out of that. So how do we do that? And that's where the masterminds start to come together with this. We hear the phase, all the blue sky.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where the big idea starts to come into focus. And then from there, it's developed accordingly through the design process, which is like a firm like Thinkwell would actually take that idea and say, well, let's not stop at a roller coaster. Let's add a food and beverage. Let's add a merchandising opportunity. Let's make sure we have bathrooms because people have to might need to use the restroom after they've done the crazy roller coaster. And they really start to flesh out that idea, generating the beautiful artwork, the animatics for the rides, and really helping develop that core idea before someone pulls the trigger and says, let's build it, at which point they facilitate relationships with ride vendors and really starting to bring those people together in order to actually produce that idea and act as a creative guardian to make sure that what was on that napkin sketch ultimately is yielded and looks pretty close to what the intent was, and is fairly close to budget. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my journey and what a Thinkwell does, or like a similar.
Sure. And we talked about your sort of taking those lessons that you had on the ops side and bringing them into design. What were some things? I know you mentioned like the trash can lane, but some other things that you thought of, or you just had that practical experience where that helped as you thought of one or two big projects that you were involved in.
I've got the best example actually right off the top of my head. You said it and I was like, I know it. Unfortunately, no one will ever get to see this again. And if you got to see it, you're very lucky. But my first big project, I had the extreme honor of kind of, I think we'll kind of had portfolios of IP and people that had specialties in certain places. And I had a history having worked with Warner Brothers when I was with Universal on the Potter projects. So there was a desire to put me back in connection with the Warner Brothers folks. I had built some relationships there, and that was what they felt that was a good fit for me. And so my very first project with them was working on, my very first project was putting a car through a billboard for the grand opening of Fast and Furious, but that was, it was a very brief moment, but it was very good. It was a lot of fun, but after that little stunt thing, I moved into the Warner Brothers World Abu Dhabi park. And I was able to be on the creative management team, helping manage all of the assets and bringing these ideas into the development space with the studio, which was a very big project for them at the time. And they had held it for anyone who knows the history of it. It was in development for a very long period of time. There were some financial moments in the 06, 08 kind of bubble bust that put things on hold. So it was a really exciting moment because the project was coming back to life. And the folks at Moral were ready. The ownership of the park were ready to move forward and build this, and they were engaged and they were excited. And so it was a very exciting time to be at Thinkwell. It was certainly one of the largest projects they had worked on. So I worked on a variety of aspects, but one in particular was the show called Meet Bugs, which is anyone who's familiar with Enchanted Tales with Belle at the Magic Kingdom in Orlando. It's a walk-through narrative-based character meet and greet type of thing. So an expanded version of a character meet and greet. And it was our version of that, but an opportunity to go backstage with Bugs and Daffy, costume characters. And then there were a variety of media moments where the characters would jump onto a screen. They would interact with the children and the families. They would do magic tricks. There were 3 or 4 rooms with different activities, and it resulted in a final scene where they kind of learned movie magic, if you will. And the final scene was actually jumping on a small stage and putting on a little show for everybody that included the magic tricks we learned. And just a really fun, interactive, obviously aimed more towards children, but we brought the dads and the moms into it as part of the show. And it was just a really unique product. And it was cool because something like that hadn't really been done in the region. So it was kind of a big test. And I think if I remember correctly, even the client was like, we're not sure if people who typically visit this park would be into this type of experience, but we're happy to try it. So because it is a big ask, and even in Orlando or the more domestic parks, sometimes people don't want to participate, and it's a big ask of people. Anywho, so we were able to, in order to prove it out, we actually had to put it on in Pasadena. We rinsed out a venue, we taped out all the lines, and we brought the Warner folks over. And we actually had to conduct a series of play tests with children because the client, Warner Brothers, et cetera, wanted to actually see the children interacting, just really seeing if it hit or whatnot. I mean, again, I think everybody's used to the concept of focus groups and whatnot, but they wanted to do the full scale as it had been written. We actually worked with a local park that had some characters that we could bring over that were Bugs and Daffy. So we had to leverage partnerships, which is something I had in order to kind of get them to come over with their costumes, because the actual costumes were being designed at the time and they weren't available. And anywho, we had to put on this whole mock show and organize it and bring in the kids and get their feedback and run focus groups with children, which if you've ever done that, it's an entirely different animal than asking, how do you feel about this ride? You have to ask very specific questions to kids to get those responses and to get, and anywho, I ended up being able to organize this entire thing. I had a team, but they kind of let me run with it because they said, well, you have the operator background, and some of my partners had the theatrical background, and they're like, we'll get the actors ready and whatnot, but you're going to have to manage the operations of it. And I had some entertainment experience. So being able to kind of combine all of those things I had been doing in the parks for several years, all of a sudden in the design space were so incredibly valuable. And mind you, I sat in rooms with some of the most brilliant creative people, roller coaster engineers that would show me the spline data, and they're like, look at this. And I'm thinking, yeah, I have no clue what this is. Great. Hit the play button. I just want to watch the roller coaster. But they're talking to me about the advanced engineering, and I'm thinking, like, I am not the smartest person in the room at all. But ultimately, that's when I learned that being the smartest person in the room is probably not very beneficial to most anyone. And being able to sit there and be able to understand what all of these individuals do, combined with my experience of having operated these things, ultimately kind of created this weird superpower that allowed me to help facilitate, because these engineers had no clue how to how to organize children and families and push them through an experience, and then keep their energy levels high, and then get feedback from them, and then be able to coordinate that with the Warner Brothers folks. And so anyways, it is to this day one of my most favorite things that we randomly tested a show for Abu Dhabi and Pasadena that was a massive success, and all the children loved it. It was ultimately installed in the park, and it was brilliant. From a labor perspective, it was a very high staff show that had a lower capacity, and I think decisions were made to the show exists to this day. I think they just operate it more sporadically. The characters are kind of dispersed through the park, so there's more touch points, which I think in that region is really important because people want to interact with the characters. And while the show was a great opportunity, it was just limiting in how many people could see it. So I'm sad about that, but I'm glad that it existed, and it was really well received in the market, which has led to some interesting things and barriers that previously would have prevented interactions between actors and guests that have now been. It served a really good purpose, I guess, is what I'm trying to say at the end of the day.
And so, talking about the work that you do now, and obviously we spoke about where it's kind of led you to now. So talk about the role that you've got now with FrankNDesign. Can you tell us a little bit about the company and how they're different to anybody else and kind of their purpose within the industry?
Yeah, certainly. So FrankNDesign's a fun experiment, if you will, that gentleman Francisco Nunez started the company, the Frank in of FrankNDesign. Which a lot of architects, I think, put their names on doors. Ironically enough, that's not it's not Frank Nunez design. It is, in fact, FrankNDesign, which is a common question. And that has to do with some of our humble, monstrous beginnings with some of the first attractions that the company produced, which I think are incredibly epic and will be revealed to the world in the near future. But it just serendipitous that FrankNDesign happens to sound very similar to other things. But and the whole the marketing that came behind it, the spark of life and bringing ideas to life, it was all very serendipitous when you think about it. But anywho, Francisco was actually I was his client originally when we were producing Hagrid's. Hagrid's had gone through a couple, as I think this is not a news to anyone, but an attraction goes through various variations and through the design process. So a Ferris wheel can become a roller coaster pretty easily through the design process, depending on the client and the expectations. And usually it's not that extreme. It's usually more so one type of roller coaster to another. And so Hagrid's was going through its normal development process, but it was at about the same time that Epic Universe was really starting to start up in its design phase. So there was a strain on resources. So there was a directive from the studio to really leverage outside partners in order to find those relationships and build them in order to help the success of the large capital that the parent Comcast was putting into the parks, which was a phenomenal thing that we're all very lucky to have because spin that Comcast has put out is generating several theme parks and attractions around the world that I think everybody this year alone will be opening between this year and next year, from the Horror Unleashed product to the Epic Universe to the kids park in Texas. So the explosive growth from the company is amazing. But anywho, there was a strain on resources, and so I had been brought in because of my relationships with Warner Brothers and my past relationship with the Harry Potter brand, and kind of the Universal folks felt that would be a really good place for me to kind of fit in. And they said, we've gone through some revisions. We're going to have to pivot a little bit from some of where we were. It's going to be kind of the sum of its parts is fine, but we're going to have to compose the music a different way, if that makes sense. So I met the creative team, a brilliant creative director, Gary Blumenstein, a good friend, who we've gone on to do several really cool epic projects together. But we were a tiny but mighty team, but our deadlines were really tight. At the time, Disney was exploring the Star Wars, developing the Star Wars product, and I think everyone knows this, but it's not, the parks don't really compete in the way that I think a lot of people think they do. They complement more so, but they both understand when one's launching one thing over the other, it needs to make sense as far as timing, because Universal and Disney opening a big, massive expansion at the exact same time could either be a really good thing, or it could be really silly, because one opening one year and the next year could actually improve visitation for both products. So there's a lot of, and I can't begin to pretend to understand the intricacies of that. Luckily, I'm not in the marketing side and that kind of the logistics, but that is a thing of its own. The analysts that kind of come up with the exact date to open a ride and to make the biggest splash, if you will. But we were in fact kind of heading towards a time where we really wanted to be in the market at the same time, in and around when the Star Wars product was opening, was the directive. So that led to a very expedited timeline, and it happens to be, to this day, one of the largest attractions, at least for Universal, that has ever been created in one of the smallest periods of time. Normally, some of these attractions would have 4 to 8 years, depending on their scale of development, and the entire process was done just shy of 4 years, which for something of the size and complexity that Hagrid's is a huge a badge of honor for the people that were involved, from the ride vendors to the designers, everyone. Anywho, but I met, because of a lack of resources, I couldn't find designers, which at the time, AutoCAD was still kind of the main, so the 2D dimensional design drawings, if you're not familiar, that kind of bring these attractions to life. I needed, for lack of a better term, CAD monkeys to come in and help draw the creative. My team was small, but they were able to generate the idea. We're going to experience a moment with Fluffy the dog, the 3-headed dog from the Potter film. They had gotten that worked out, but I needed someone to draft it, to put it in, and to coordinate it against the ride, because anybody who's experienced Hagrid's or knows about it, you are in the forest, and the roller coaster, our directive was to put the roller coaster as humanly possible to anything and everything to make it feel that real, that is still in fact safe. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the concept of a reach envelope, and that was our ride or die, if you will. Put the trees, put the dog, put everything right up against that reach envelope, so it felt like you were flying a motorcycle through the forest, which I think we were fairly successful in doing. It's a very hard thing to do, which I'm sure you guys are super familiar with.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to do. Typically, the goal is to put things further away from the roller coaster, not next to it. But I think we were effective, especially when it comes to live organic matter. Trees are a royal pain in the because they can just drop a branch at any point in time. So you'd be surprised at the systems, just the way a tree is. Every single, this is a fun fact, I guess. Every single thing that is in the compound, so the ride area of the Hagrid experience, is so intentionally placed, from a flower to a rock to water to a tree, and everything has several safety straps that you'll never see. Like the logistics that went into ensuring that ride is so incredibly safe, and luckily there's never been any accidents or anything along those lines because of all this commitment from the engineering teams. But the complexity of just ensuring that a real tree can exist that close to a ride is mind-boggling. But what's really interesting about that is that's really where FrankNDesign came into play, because I needed resources, and we were struggling because it needed to be designed in 3D. So I had artists that were working in insert 3ds Max, Maya, SketchUp. There's just so many different softwares that one could leverage, but they were all speaking different languages. And when I met Francisco, he said, "Yeah, I don't know why everybody's speaking different languages. Why don't you all speak the same language?" And I said, "That's great. I have some money. I don't have time, and I'm not going to learn to speak these languages." And he sat down, and we had at the time, I don't know, 20 meetings on the calendar for coordination. So the ride vendor, the structural steel vendor, the theming vendor, the animation vendor, all these things had to coordinate, and in a very limited amount of time. And so we had these sessions to go through and say, to redline and say, nope, this the dog's heads through the rockwork. The rockwork's in the way of the ride. The ride is going over top of this and it's going to kill someone. And we literally removed all of them from the calendar after Francisco brought this particular scene. Because we would do this for each scene of the ride.
Oh,
you
wow.
have to go through and you'd have to really study each scene. And then once you get to the end, you have to do it again and make sure that all the changes that you asked everyone to make actually were implemented into it.
Mhm.
Which again, in a longer development cycle, you have quite a bit of time to do this. And our, we were getting a new version of the, no spoilers here, but the Devil's Snare experience of the attraction. We would get a new version of that model every day as the designers are adding the detail and the Devil's Snare bits. The ride vendor is giving us updated, well, you actually have to have safety pathways. The pathway grew 2 inches. Well, that means that the rock work has to grow 4 inches. And that was all just rapidly changing. And once Francisco had come in and really started coordinating all these things in one master model, at the time we were leveraging Revit as our kind of BIM software, we were instantly seeing the launch systems, the EERs, the track, the drop systems, the rock work, the structural, all these things were instantly within a 3D environment and were being coordinated. And I thought, this is magic. So none of these meetings needed to exist any longer, because we didn't really need to have them, because in the model, I'll break this down just so we don't have to go into a long, boring discussion about Revit, but basically anywhere there was a collision between any of the different scopes, it would turn bright green or bright red. So we would know, hey, there's a collision, and then we could all look at it in the model. And oftentimes, before we ever even had to do anything, the rockwork guy would say, "Oh, I see what happened. We're 4 inches into the ride envelope," and he would export a new version of the rockwork, the head chopper, and say, "Hey, we're removing this. It's going to collide with the coaster, whatever." And problem solved. And so then it just opened up this new way of communicating in this 3D environment. And it's not new. Revit has been around for a really long time, and it wasn't being used heavily in the creative process at that time. And that was kind of the magic, is that the engineers were using it for the ride, and they're like, it's here, but we don't understand how it matches the rock that you have in that software. So once we really started combining all of it, we realized there's quite a bit of magic in the process. And I remember this day, Francisco said, I think I should make, at the time he was working with another firm, kind of just doing this specialized team to do this particular project. And that particular firm leverages a lot of large hotels, and they didn't have much interest in developing rides. And he said, I think I should make this into a business and do this. And I said, yeah, I think you should. So FrankNDesign was loosely born at that moment, and he was able to help us with the Haggard attraction, and I can't say that it was the first, but it was probably one of the most successful uses of leveraging the BIM process in designing a super coordinated, super complex, scenic, all these variable things, coordinating all these elements and designing with them. And Frank always says this thing. He likes to say, we don't live in a 2D world. So when everybody looks at flat drawings, he's like, we don't live in 2D, we live in 3D. So why wouldn't we look at things in 3D? And duh. So anywho, ended up inadvertently helping Frank kind of find his way. And then he went on to build the company. And some years later, I actually interfaced with him again on Epic Universe, where he had started developing quite a few relationships and had worked on several aspects of the park. And I invited him to come and join myself and Gary and our team to support some other magical things that we were doing. And he grew that into having supported 4 of the 5 lands in the park and having a pretty decent lion's share of coordination, show development drawings for the entire park, routing through, at the time, FrankNDesign. So it was kind of really fun to watch him grow. And ultimately, he said, why don't you, I think you are so talented in the design space, but I need someone that has witnessed the power of this, that can actually help other producers understand the value of this. And I found myself on the vendor side, which was new and exciting for me.
I love that the transition between the relationship that you had. I think that's incredible to be able to put that. And it's great as well, because you've seen firsthand as a customer how that works and how you can leverage that and kind of move that onwards. What in terms of that then, what would you say is over the space of years, and CAD is a really good example of this. So how do you now design for modern audiences? Because things change so fastly nowadays. That what would you say is something that you really consider in your design process for modern day audiences?
So the FrankNDesign process, well, I'll speak from that perspective first, is largely built based upon the fact that the timelines, the budgets actually are getting bigger in some instances. I think some people would argue they're not, but I would say they are. But the timelines are shrinking rapidly. There's almost always more money than time at this point in where we are in the industry. But everyone wants something, especially when you work in like the KSA region. I think they would prefer to have, we would say we're working on several projects there, but we'd say, well, this will be 6 months of design development, and they're like, well, we wanted 6 weeks, and it's like that's a 5-land theme park with 6 roller coasters. And they're like, yes, we'd like to buy the roller coaster right now, and it's like, okay, and they're like, and it should be here next week, and then I call Adam and I go, so the expectation, and I wish that was an exaggeration, but that's fairly accurate.
True.
But the expectation, and that varies throughout the world, but there is an expectation to move as quickly as possible. And so from the FrankNDesign side, something that is really nice about our process and why I have always been attached to it, and this goes back to the Haggard thing, was that I had such a limited amount of time, and being able to jump into a 3D environment, implement all these things. Going back to the operator comment I made earlier, I would never insult operators, but operators aren't typically trained on how to read architectural drawings. It's not really their bread and butter. They know how to de-escalate a situation, how to evacuate a guest, and how to entertain that guest safely, but they're not, that one part of the process about reading advanced blueprints is left out of the process. Even getting feedback from them on, maybe give an evacuation path. And I'll never forget this gentleman goes, do you ever look at these 2D plans and visualize them as 3D? And I'm like, excuse me? And he goes, yeah, do you envision like this is like a real wall, and the roller coaster is going through this wall? And I just sat there for a second, and my natural inclination was to make a joke and be like, well, yes, this is this is my job. But I stopped and I said, I do. Did you not? And he said, I didn't for the longest time. And then I've started telling other operators to do that. And I thought, I was going to be snarky and make a funny comment about like, how do you not do that? And then I realized, well, that's not intuitive to some people because they're not in design. They don't understand what these lines on these pages, a section, an elevation, they don't understand this. And I thought, oh, okay, well, hold on. There's a nugget here because this is actually important, because if I can help people understand that these things can be visualized in 3D, and then I get better feedback from them, that actually allows me to produce a better attraction ultimately. And I don't have to change it later when they didn't realize, because somebody happened to not be educated on that process. I don't have to change something because they didn't realize they didn't have their line for their trash can anyways. So, I say that as an example because all these things being able to be iterated on very rapidly in a 3D environment is so critical because of the less amount of time we have to design things. And those things are captured, and we reduce risk, and we reduce change orders later on. All those things are just, it's better thought out, and the client or the owner operator ultimately has a better understanding of what it is that they're actually going to be handed when the keys to the car are handed over to them. And, some of these models get used for training, and I've looked at operators and said, well, you can just take this model and I can put a little line on it and I can actually show in 3D for your future operator how to evacuate a guest. And they said, we don't have to wait till the thing's done to understand a training session. And I said, well, it'll never replace it, but no, you can do it digitally anyway. So we've created these training programs. So I say from, to kind of poorly answer your question, the trends that I'm seeing is that we're seeing less and less time to develop these experiences, with a desire for additional storytelling and more complex experiences. And in order to do that, there has to be a smarter, faster way to design in order to ensure stakeholders, from ride vendors to operators to creatives, can all collaborate in environments and all speak that same language. I think that's just so incredibly important, because if not, the napkin sketch doesn't line up with the final product, and then someone is ultimately upset or doesn't know what to do with their $100 million attraction that they've just been handed. And that is not the desire. We want everyone to feel as though they're part of that design process, and ensure that again, that final product is familiar and is exactly what everybody wanted it to be. So I think that kind of answered the question.
Wait, yeah, it definitely did. Thank you. I think it definitely did. And I think your examples helped that even more. I think it's kind of led me on to the next question that I've got, really, which is from the end user perspective. So for the guest that's going to be coming to these experiences, do you think there's anything at the moment that operators are maybe they're overlooking? Do you think there's something that can be done from the design stage at the moment, that maybe there's a gap in the market, or there's something that can be changed? Do you think that there's something being overlooked at all?
That's an interesting question. I think the design is more forward in the process than it's more visible and more forward in the process than it's ever been before. So as where it used to be, spend a lot of time with the big idea, this is the actual production phase, design existed in the middle and may have been in a silo, may not have been in a silo, whatever the case is. I think the design process is more global, in that it touches the beginning, it goes all the way to the end. You see design firms being creative guardians. So a package isn't just handed off and somebody just doesn't build it. Most creative firms hold on to a piece of it all the way through to act as kind of the enforcer on behalf of the client who might not know how to push for certain things. So the back end of it, the delivery experience is improving. The middle section of design is, I think, pretty consistent throughout the process of historical design. I mean, there's a design process that everyone follows. The front end, there's more and more influence in from the operations side, having operators having their seat at the table. That's a big thing. I don't know that there's as much of an influence or as much of guests being involved earlier. I think because the feedback cycle in parks is improving, a lot of parks spend a lot of time with surveys and the access. There's thousands of soapboxes. It's called TikTok that didn't previously exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, I mean, it's actually really beneficial to all of us in our own way. But we certainly know who the best coaster manufacturers are, because people stand on their soapbox and they gush about their love of B&M, Zamperla, Intamin, whomever, or their love of a particular attraction. We're getting real-time insights like we never have before of what the exact elements are, the exact color, the raw color. Like they know the exact hue of the track, or we like 2 head chopper moments. People are, this is exponentially generating more and more content right now, because people have these soapboxes that is social media. And they stand up and they can express their hatred. The fan community is inherently negative. It's such a wonderful place, but there's a lot of people that have a lot of opinions that I would say maybe don't communicate that positively. But we get that feedback, whether the designers are seeing it inadvertently, whether the parks are collecting it through their analysts and their internal departments, external companies that consolidate this, that go into AECOM reports and things of that nature. I'd say that a lot of data is being collected and is being actioned on sooner and going into that design process. As where in the past, if you go into a 6 to 8 year cycle on the development of a ride, and year 4, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but let's say just year 4, you're really starting to lock in that coaster. It's being developed and built, but you're already seeing a trend somewhere else that is something different than what you're doing. And there's not a way to action or change that. You might be missing out on something, and you have another 4 years of development, and then you have a 20-year life expectancy out of the ride minimum before you can, so it's, I think getting that real-time data and some feedback much sooner is probably the where we are as an industry. What's beneficial is that we're seeing and feeling and hearing more of that upfront, and with the rapid iterating timelines, we're getting product to market faster, so that we're reducing that gap between what we're hearing and what's being requested from the communities, and from the guests and the folks going to the park. And I think that's kind of the intersection of what's interesting, and that's going into design, and that's being influenced, or that's influencing the design, which is hopefully creating better, more positive experiences on the back end. I think maybe answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I do love the fact that you've mentioned that as well. Actually, the feedback is noticed, that whether it's positive, whether it's negative, it does go noticed online. And I think that kind of rapid turnaround, and what you said about the timeline getting tight as well, actually will get to that stage where that timeline just becomes so tight that actually some of the real world data that we're getting right now is directly influencing these projects that are going to happen in a couple of years' time. So it's kind of great to hear about the speed of that progress.
Yep. Oh, that was awesome, Jeremy. Thank you so much. And I love kind of just getting the minutia of the design things, because it's something that I know our listeners are interested in. But you guys are, companies like FrankNDesign do pretty amazing projects, but you can't talk about all of them because of certain NDAs, I'm sure. But also, so many times, you're the, in the mix, but not sort of the headlining company, but you touch so many things. So I think it's great that you can kind of share this unique attribute your company brings to the industry.
Yeah, it's that is probably I think we all share this, and it's both the most like amazing / horrible aspect of being involved, is that I know largely the next 6 to 10 years of what will happen in this community or in this industry, and I can't talk about it for 6 to 10, probably 12 to 14, or maybe never. So it's funny when I hear I'll hear friends. I'll be out with my wife, and I'll hear friends or somebody talk about the new Epic universe. There's a Harry Potter area, and I'm sitting there thinking like, duh. And then I remember that it's been with me for 8 years, and I've known about it for 8 years. But this is probably the first time that someone saw a commercial on TV about this. So it is that's humbling in a weird way, but it is neat to be involved, and it's fun. I think I've always been excited to be a part of the industry and kind of be involved in keeping the secrets, and then helping make these things a reality, and then really blowing people's minds. I think that's a really fun aspect that we all share.
Going to our fast pass round, we just want to ask you a few questions to kind of get your thoughts on a few parts of the industry. So the first one is, what is your favorite amusement or theme park? Real easy, right? No problem.
Yeah, well, that's I guess I have the blessing and the curse of having been so fortunate to visit both as a fan of the industry and as someone in it, so many amazing parks. Which picking one is difficult. I'll pick two if that's okay.
That's totally fine.
And I'll say the two. I'm an authentic person. That's my buzzword of the week, I guess. Immersive is so out now. No, but I think authenticity is a key word, and I think that I talk about it a lot when I'm in developing experiences in any particular. I want something that's authentic. I don't want it to feel fake. I want it to at least feel real, or actually be real and authentic. But I think when I think of Dollywood in the United States, is very high on my list because of its authenticity. The people you meet there are so genuine. They feel like family, probably because they are all family. I think a large percentage of them are related to Dolly, but they're authentic individuals. When you go to a park and you put your soda on the side of the car, and you throw your hat over there, your loose items, and maybe you get stepped on by the next train. Not at Dollywood. This lovely man or woman will come over and go, "Hey there, y'all. Here, let me just take," and they'll help you take your glasses off. It's just this authentic, like they're so kind and nice, and it's genuine hospitality. And you think like just something so silly like that. It's like that actually has they're all, every time they dispatch a train, it's not like I'm having to clap because this is what I was told to do. They're so genuinely excited you're experiencing an attraction that means something to them. So the food's authentic, probably authentically going to kill you because of like sausage and grilled onions, and
It's
but
always nice and light. Always nice
yeah,
and light.
there's nothing heavy there. It's the exact food you want right before you jump on a roller coaster that drops you straight down. But anywho, I really like in the setting and the rides and the storytelling they do is it's definitely, it's not a Universal or Disney. These aren't super themed attractions in most cases, but they do really good light theming that actually conveys and tells stories. They've just opened a new Big Bear kind of family coaster experience that it's very lightly themed, but I think it's very clever and well done. And I think it shows that affordability-wise, you can tell stories with very little money. You don't necessarily have to build a Hagrid's. I think the Big Bear product is probably equally successful to Hagrid's in what it accomplishes. Obviously, there's a lot more show involved in Hagrid's, and that's appreciated. But I think so. Anyways, I love Dolly, and then if I'm going international, Fantasia Land in Germany, I think is a bit of a, people know parts of it, but I would argue that more people know Terran than they know where Terran lives. Because I think people attach to the rides, but the park itself is actually such a little gem. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it just it has some, for a small, tiny regional European park, has theming that I think rivals Disney and Universal. In some instances, might actually be better than some of what they've produced. And I think their commitment to unique experiences, their new Fly experience, the Vekoma flying coaster within the steampunk area, is just nutso theming. Like it just, and when you look at the value of what they spend in order to create a lot of that, it's oftentimes not imperative. Like a lot of people it's obtainable. So, and I think that the experience they have there is very authentic as well. So it just, those two are my top contenders for being world-class parks on every level, from ride collection to service to food to the overall, just what it feels like to park your car, stay in a capsule hotel, open your door to see a roller coaster, walk down a flight of stairs, and then you're in a chocolate, interactive ride. Like it's such a well-composed thing. So anyways, those would be my top two, I think.
Great choices.
Yeah.
The next question we've got is, what is your favorite single attraction?
Yeah, that's harder than the whole. Well, I don't want to be biased because I've been a part of some really cool things, but I will tell you. I'll tell you my most favorite scene from an attraction, if that makes sense, because it largely inspired why I am the way I am. As a small child, my mother on various on many a trip to Disney would kind of scold me because I spent a lot of time looking backwards or looking, like, trying to obviously look behind the scenes. And she, Jeremy, this way, look here, this is the thing, we're paid money for this. And I was, she reminds me to this day, she's like, you were so fascinated by the projector behind us that you weren't paying attention to the Haunted Mansion, whatever, ghost. And I couldn't explain at the time why, but I think I just had I think I've always been very curious, which I would attribute my success in this industry as being, I'm just endlessly curious about everything. But anywho, I rode the pirate attraction. I remember this vividly as a small child. I think I went to Disney when I was like 5 or 6 for the first time. I still to this day remember this particular moment. I don't remember Minnie or Mickey or any of that, but I'm sure they were great. But I remember when you come, and I think this is in every Pirates around the world, so it should be pretty familiar. But when you go in the caves, you're in the boat, you come around the corner right before the drop, and there's a vignette, a little scene that is a skeleton on a broken boat. He's got a pirate hat. He's holding the ship's steering wheel. It's raining. There's lightning. There's a smell. I think it's just the chlorine, but there's a smell. There's a breeze you haven't felt. There's a weird seagull just squawking over here. But you have this. I think, and I've distilled this down after having written so many things in the world, that this one moment, it just instantly, you go from rock cave to a pirate, a skeleton, a what, and then you drop, and now you're in this entire world. The world's getting much smaller as you're in this little cave, and then this world just opens up, and it's just pirates, and it's real, and it's So that little vignette to me is probably one of the, despite my attachment to, or my participation, I should say, in some of the highest spend on attractions. Hagrid's was not cheap. And there's quite a bit of show there, and I'm very proud of it. But I would say that scene with that pirate is more impressive to me than anything I've ever been a part of. And I think far more impressive than a lot of things that have been done in the past 20 years, despite some wonderful show scenes and things. But just that little vignette does so much with so little. So I don't know that I'm the, Haunted Mansion or Pirates is my favorite ride ever, but I will forever remember my first time seeing that and thinking, holy crap, look at this. And there's nothing there. It's just a simple move. The skeleton doesn't even move. The wheel just turns. It's just string with light on it. Sorry, it's filler and some wind, but it instantly sets the tone. And something like that to me, and I would say largely any attraction that has a moment like that just captures you, that is impactful. That fuels my like interest in something. And I was the first time I ever saw that, and every time I ride that ride, every time it snaps, like something switches in my brain, and I am locked in and ready for this weird little pirate adventure. But yeah, so that to me is kind of my favorite theme park aspect of a ride.
I love it. I'm a big Pirates fan as well. So right behind me is a Reed diffuser, what is inspired by the smell of pirates. So there we go. Nice choice.
Which is a healthy mixture of like chlorine, mold, and like several other things.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. You shouldn't like it, but you shouldn't like it, but it smells nice.
It's got that 1970s theme park smell.
Yeah.
All right. So Dead Men Do Tell No Tales. We're going to ask you to tell one here. And that is, as you look to the future, what do you think is a big trend that maybe other people aren't keyed in on, or a big change that we're going to see in the next decade?
Ooh.
And you can't just slap it and say it's going to be AI, because that's what everybody wants to do nowadays, is slap AI on it. But what is one thing where you think is going to be, a watershed that people aren't thinking about yet?
Yeah. Well, I'm not on the AI bandwagon. I think it has its purpose. Look, theme park people, the industry, we have always and will always have to be innovators, in a sense that we are combining unique effects and attractions, or integrating new elements into attractions. It's just it's where we started. It's what we constantly just iterate and evolve on our own things. So we're inherently innovative in many ways, and I think that's really nice. And I think AI is a tool that can help that. The talented artists and I've played quite a bit of AI, and it's not going to generate a piece of concept art that is going to be beneficial. But I think in the middle of a meeting, if somebody needs a visual in order to attach to something, there's like a great opportunity for that. So sorry, that's me stepping up on my AI soapbox, but I don't see it designing a roller coaster anytime soon and putting any of this out of work. But as far as a trend that I'm seeing, I got two, I guess. One, I think I'll do the smaller of the two. First, the water park market is where I'm very interested. But you're a theming guy, Jeremy, and you like roller coasters. Yes, but I think water is it's not a multi-million-dollar ride system, despite my desire to have those. I think that you see pop jet fountains at parks, at just local parks, little fountains that kids throw off all their clothes and run around, and all the parents are sitting around, and that is incredibly entertaining and costs nothing. You see water park product being very popular, and it's something that can get into resort spaces. It can be within the park spaces, standalone. There's really interesting the water market, I guess, the water experience market.
Mm-hmm.
I think that space, flow riders, or just the wave simulations, all of those. There's a really cool thing. Look it up at Futuroscope. They have a water park product that they've just developed. And there's like an indoor water experience where there's fountains, and there's it's media, and it's really just a little water play area, but it's elevated. And I think that space is very interesting. And I think we'll see more hybrid between traditional theme park the wet versus the dry park. I think we're going to sorry, I'm going to consolidate all this. I just worked through this in my head. It took me a minute. I've come to a conclusion. I think we're going to see the consolidation of the wet park and the dry park starting to be less of a firm line between the two and blurring between the edges. I think that is, and you can see that. I'll back my statement up by saying this thing at Futuroscope, which is, I will butcher the name in French, so I just won't do it. It's the cool water thing at the water park. At Phantasialand, there's actually a climbing trail where it's, if you haven't ever looked that up, it's an adventure trail. I'm fairly certain you could actually die on it, and I think they're okay with that because it's an actual, there's no like, I walked up to it and there's a waterfall, and I'm thinking like, where's my harness? And the guy's like, climb. And I'm like, but
it's very German. You follow the rules and you won't get hurt. That's it.
Yeah. So. And I'm thinking like, I will die. And he's like, careful. And I'm like, okay, well, here we go. And I think at one point I was up to my knee in a pool of water wearing jeans, and it was very cold that day. It's fine. I rode the water ride and was obliterated 5 minutes later. But anyways, look that up. But I think the juncture between water and these dry spaces is going to merge more. And I think that's an interesting intersection. You see that sometimes with roller coasters where they have maybe the ability to dump water, or you can spray water at them. I think that's a really interesting intersection that there's can be more play with. That would be, people really like water experiences. I don't, but I think a lot of people do. So I think that's a really cool thing. And then my more bread and butter answer is, I think storytelling, which I know that probably seems like a common thing people say, the story. I think storytelling is actually far more important than what we're all saying. I don't know that we have to have in-depth narratives that are 30, 60 pages long explaining why this roller coaster is called Top Thrill Dragster. I think it's a race car roller coaster, and that's cool. I think theming things and story is going to be the differentiator in a world where everybody can have an inverted B&M roller coaster. Everyone can have one, and you can say yours is 10 feet taller or yours does 4 more loops than the other one. I think the differentiator is ultimately adding some level of theming. And I just saw this. I know nothing about it, so forgive me. Take away my theme park card. But Rapterra, I think it's at
Dominion.
Dominion, yes. I was going to say, is it Carowinds or Dominion? I can't remember. A wing coaster, a launched wing product. I've just seen a picture of it. I knew it was out there. We don't do a lot of work with Carowinds, but the lovely part, or sorry, not Carowinds, Dominion. Sorry, either or actually. So if they want to call me, but they don't do heavy theming on things. But I saw this new a ride through or something just the other two or three. It must have just opened, and they've probably spent almost nothing to take what would be a rather standard B&M wing coaster. I think it has I'm sure it has some kind of really cool stat that they market, but a rather standard product, and they've added some head choppers and just some light theming to it. I would argue that it's actually not a lot of theming, and it's very reminiscent of, I'll take it back to my home park, Busch Gardens product that you would see at probably the two Busch parks, maybe not SeaWorld as much. But they've always done a really good job of adding thematic elements to attractions, raw steel, and making them have Montu, Kumba. They just have a little bit of theming that helps sell the story. And I think that that's a differentiator between what you would see traditionally at like a Six Flags, which is a raw piece of steel in a parking lot, which I think they're also taking steps to improve. But I think a big trend we're going to see is that everybody can have an intimate impulse. Everybody can have a cool drop track element. At some point, everyone can have it, but how do you differentiate? If in a world of 20 different people, I was just in Mexico, and I have zip lines, I have zip lines, I have zip lines. And the one company that said, we have zip lines and there's fire. And I thought, I want to go there. And they said, and you zip line through a jungle ruin. And they've just added a little bit of theming, a little bit of story, and it doesn't have to be wildly expensive. And that somehow has elevated them. And in a zero-sum game where they're, I'm $5 cheaper than the next guy, all the way down to the bottom, they're actually saying, oh, we're $20 more expensive, but fire. It's like, so they're actually getting by adding more show value and adding some story and adding some narrative. The guy couldn't explain to me I was like, is there a story? And he's like, fire. And I'm like, okay. Here's the thing: add fire to your attraction, it'll be successful. No, but the idea that you could just add a little bit of story, a little bit of theming. It doesn't have to be the Forbidden Forest. It could just be some thematic elements like this Rapterra. Again, I was very impressed by it. It just has a couple of head chopper moments. They look like they keep getting smaller. the theming and the queue is very light. You see this again, Busch Gardens, even Alpengeist, I think, is a really cool example Baron at Efteling, I think is really cool. That's just asking a ride vendor to engineer their support structure differently to add theming and story. So I think those are the types of things that we should see more of, where we're adding something to enhance. Just there is a story to be told, even if it's just I don't know what a raptera is, a bird, a dinosaur, a weird monster thing that I guess can fly. But just adding some theming to that, I think actually makes a substantial difference. And I think that is the trend we're going to see more of. Carefully curating some level of narrative development for all things. These aren't just a cool name and a cool marquee anymore. There's actually some story that is in and around these experiences.
No, I think that's a great answer, because I just see so much, on the professional side, where at our company, it was 30 years ago, we're just kind of cranking out crazy buses. You get a bus, you get a bus. It's like Oprah. And now it's everyone wants their own, whether it's homegrown IP or someone else's as part of that. And I think the other thing you hit on too that's really important is you get out of the value selling proposition. It's not we're $5 cheaper than somebody else. It's we provide a different memorable experience that you'll want to put on social with your family or friends. And I think that changes the business model, the way people think. And I really believe that's important.
I agree.
Excellent. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today. We had a great talk. Where can people find you and or FrankNDesign on the socials?
Yeah, so I mean, LinkedIn is a good spot to find me. So I'm sure Jeremy Grunert, I'm attached to all these people. You'll find me somewhere. And then FrankNDesign, FrankNDesign.com is a good spot to start as well. And then I don't do a lot of the other socials. I've kind of stepped away from all of it. I think it's because people hurt my feelings with how they respond to things I build. But I'm just kidding. That's for all you fans out there. Be nice to us. We have feelings.
Welcome to my world, Jeremy. Welcome to my world.
I'm surprised you still have social media at this point, because I'm around on the Facebook and the Instagrams, and I'm around. I'm sure people can find me. Highly visible.
Excellent. Mark, you?
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn, and search for Mark Lofthouse, and you will find me there.
Excellent. I'm at Roller Coaster Sales Guy on Instagram, LinkedIn also, and then follow my company's account, Zamperla Coasters. And as always, thank you so much to our partners at blooloop, blooloop.com, at blooloop on all the socials. We appreciate their partnership and allows us to talk to great guests like Jeremy. So we look forward to our next episode. Jeremy, thanks again. And we'll see everybody out on the midways this spring. Thank you.
Thank you.